lose yourself in a good book. The Bord Gáis Energy Book Club.
Well, we'll pop back out to Alan later on to get an update on the traffic. In the meantime, Fallen is the enthralling new book by Irish author Liam Mills. It tells the story of Katie Crilly, a young girl who lives through the turbulent time of the 1916 Easter Rising. Struggling to find her place in society, she soon finds herself torn between her loyalty to the cause fought for on the Western Front and her love of her own country. We're joined now by Leah, who is here to tell us more. Leah, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Leah, we've both been fascinated by this book and discovered an awful lot of things about the Rising that we didn't know before, and that's what we were just discussing in the break there, that we have been taught the history of the Rising in a particular way and we know particular facts, but there's so much more to the story.
There really is. You know, Hilary Mantel has this great line that history is all the things they try to hide from us, not the things they try to show you. And the official version of the Rising is so familiar and so well loved. It's like the foundation myth of the state.
But it's a myth, you say?
Well, yeah, I think everything is a myth once it's been had a gloss applied to it and it's been presented as an official version. And when we, with hindsight looking back, we can see that this step led to that step led to the next step, and here we are and we have a republic about which, you know, we all have different views. And I don't think anybody thinks that the original people who planned the Rising would be happy with the state of affairs as they are now.
You started writing this in 2008. What was the plan then at the outset? Was it to tell a personal story or to use the history as a backdrop or vice versa?
I was really interested in what it would have been like to be a Dubliner when the Rising broke out, if you didn't know what was going on. The whole concept of sudden violence erupting outside your door and really all hell breaking out around you and just not knowing what's going on or who's involved, what's at stake, when it's going to end, what it's going to lead to, what will happen next. So that was my original intent, and I thought I could keep it really local. But the more that I learned about the Rising and the complexities of Irish politics at the time, the more I realised that I couldn't write about the Rising without also writing about the war.
And of course the two of them make for interesting interplay because there were thousands of young Irish men fighting for what they believed absolutely to be the cause of right for the British, while at the same time there were Irish men fighting for what they believed to be the cause of right against the British.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it all had to do with the Home Rule Bill that was passed just before the war broke out and then was shelved. And in fact, I heard somebody say on the radio the other day that during that summer in 1914, the really big news story was what was going on in Ireland, because with everything that was happening with Carson's volunteers in the north and the volunteers in the south, everybody expected that there could be a civil war at that point, but then war broke out in Europe instead. And then we had a split in the volunteers because John Redmond pledged the volunteers to fight for Britain, and not all of the volunteers agreed with that, and then we had the split, the famous Irish split. You know,
is it a difficult thing to do to keep the history from overwhelming it and it becoming a history book? Because the more you research, the more you must feel the urge to write a historical book.
Absolutely, and that was one of the problems and one of the reasons I think it took me so long, because one sure thing is that readers don't want to be lectured to, and when you start to bring in information, background information, I think it's a killer for a story. So it's really hard to balance the demands of the story with the claims of history and what actually did happen. And I got very bogged down in detail. It's kind of like a concrete boot for a story. So I had to try and pull all of
detail.
That. Yeah, and it's also about knowing the facts and then having to work around them and having to almost unpick what you know about the time, because the people who are living through it didn't know what was going to happen next.
So the focal point for your story is a girl by the name of Katie Crilly. Katie rather. And what's her story? What's her backstory?
Katie's story is that her twin brother Liam was a follower of Redmond and Tom Kettle, and he joined the British Army at the start of the war, and she was disgusted for all kinds of reasons. And then Liam is killed. One of the things that I learned about the Rising when I started to do the research is that the day that it broke out was actually the first anniversary of two major battles where hundreds of Dublin men were killed. One was Gallipoli and the other was the Second Battle of Ypres. So Katie's twin Liam dies in 1915, and then a year later she's still coping with her grief. she's not really able to move forward. She doesn't know if she wants to move forward. Do you know? So, and then the rebellion starts, the rising starts, and she's caught up in the violence. She's stranded in somebody else's house because she can't get back across the river to where she lives. And then the story unfolds.
And one of the things that's interesting when you get into some of the detail that you've sort of researched, the amount of people who were killed and injured in the Rising, it's obviously the historical fact, but it's not always reflected in the stories that you hear about it, but there were thousands injured.
No, and that really interests me, that even now our politicians are still very fond of referring to the 16 men who were executed as if they were the only people who lost their lives.
Just give us the stats, because I was very shocked.
442 people were killed. That's including, and in fact, more citizens of Dublin were killed than British Army and rebels put together. There were nearly 1,000 people who were seriously injured. 100,000 people had to go on relief after the Rising because they had lost everything. That was a third of the population of the city.
100,000 people.
100,000.
Wow.
And when you think about the area you're talking about, it's very small. It's about 3 square
only
miles.
3 years after the lockout, when a huge proportion of people would have been
Exactly.
suffering through similar experiences.
Yeah.
And the story of Katie, as it unfolds, there's also a love story there.
Of course.
Of course. Wouldn't be a good read without a love story.
You have to have love in it somewhere. Love and death, the big subjects.
And who does she fall for?
Oh, well.
You don't want to give away too much.
No, I don't
you
think
could give
I
a little
should.
hint, perhaps.
Well, there are 2 men that she's interested in the book. One of them is a friend of her dead brother's, who's somebody that she's attracted to, but he's not a very wholesome character. And then when she's stranded in the house of friends, she meets Hubie, who is a soldier who fought with Liam. So he knew Liam, and he has been invalided out of the army. He's been wounded, and he is as damaged as she is, and far more bitter, actually. And so the 2 of them are trying to figure out how to move forward. What choices are they going to make in these days of literally fire and brimstone?
Well, it's a fascinating subject matter, I have to say, and it's been much lauded. Lots of people saying lovely things about it. Fallen by Leah Mills, available in all good bookshops now. Thank you very much, Leah.
Thanks a million. Thank you.
Lose yourself in a good book. The Board Gosh Energy Book Club.